In West Virginia, the country roads take you home. But in Ohio, there is a place on a hill back in the woods where the walls hold you prisoner and they never let you go home. They housed many mentally ill patients, and experiments were done on the patients. Lobotomies were performed, as well as electric shock and other experimental drugs of the time. The population at the asylum became overcrowded. Homeless people and unwanted relatives and rebellious teenagers were taken to the asylum instead of their proper places. And the staff, many of whom were not trained to take care of this kind of people. One night, legend has it that a woman wanted to play a harmless game of hide and go seek, and she disappeared. But a month later, they found her. They found her lifeless body, naked and on the floor. They tried the best they could, but the marks where her body once lay could never be cleaned up, and the stain is there to this very day. People say the residents still roam the halls of the old Athens Lunatic Asylum. The Ridges. That is what it's called in the present day. Ohio University bought the Athens Lunatic Insane Asylum, and they are in the process of renovating and rebuilding the once famous and notorious mental hospital for the mentally ill. It already houses many departments for the Ohio University campus. In the front of the building is the Kennedy Arts Center. As you can see, this building is of grandeur architecture. They just don't make them like this anymore. The building is much taller and grander. You would just have to be there in person to appreciate it all. All of the stories that came out of Athens began here, in this huge complex of buildings that stand up on a hill, kind of tucked away neatly from society. So many things happened behind these walls and on these grounds. Some of the stories have become things of legends. Some of them are stories that scare people to the bone. For me, I was just there, checking out the place This statue is from the Kennedy Arts Center. I found that the Art Center had been there at least since the 80s. I could feel this energy as I was walking the grounds of the asylum. If you can see the buildings there, a lot of them have been restored. The windows are all new again. The shrubbery, the landscape, all of it is beaming with life. There's no sign of death, at least not to the eyes. But to those people that know, death and torture was an all too common thing in this building and amongst these grounds. You can see that they are renovating and have put new windows into the building in some areas, and it's slowly changing into something else. As you can see here, the building still has no windows, and you can see signs of construction all about. The asylum that we knew as it was is going to be no more one day. It will all be transformed into part of Ohio University. You can see the heavy construction, and if you look at the bottom, you can see the new windows. Just think how many eyes were looking out those windows at one time. How many people roamed this very campus right here. How many people met their end in this building. How many people, I can tell you how many people, over 1,900 that I know of, are laid to rest less than a block away from the asylum in their own graveyard. This building here is the Auditorium. It is definitely going to be renovated and kept. You can see all of the gravel and all of the construction equipment. You can see some of the old scaffolding from the building still exists there. And as I walk to the older parts of the building, then you can really see what it used to be like. This is another shot of the auditorium from the side and across the street. Well, that's another old building. There were many buildings part of the insane asylum. In fact, they all have signs that read what they are. This building is used by the university today. And as you can see, they simply call it the Ridges. Anything that has to do with the dead or the mentally ill is nowhere to be found. But if you look close enough, just underneath the surface, you will find all you need to know. As the day went by, I thought it was all beautifully depressing, actually. Well, more beautiful than depressing. But when I really thought about it, and I thought about all of the patients, and their stories, it kind of made me really sad inside, and maybe even a little scary. It kind of made me wonder, are some of them still roaming the halls of the asylum? Do some of them still walk the grounds? I could feel the presence of energy. It didn't really feel negative. It felt like it was just happy that someone was there. This brick road surrounds the asylum. This is the backside of the asylum where I think the famous TB ward once stood before they demolished it in 2013. They said they demolished it because people were breaking in and doing ghost investigations. And now all that remains of the old TB ward are pictures and video on the internet. This is a building, an office building, that the Ohio University campus uses now. You can see all of the evidence of construction as you see the dirt piles lay everywhere. You can see the plant life and the trees and the forestry was plentiful here. They definitely, I think, wanted to have the patients surrounded by life, a scenic view of hope. Hope that most of them never got. It was just false hope. For at the university, a lot of infamous things happened. As I went up to the old chapel, someone was about to reach out from beyond the grave and say, "Hey, you," in a female voice, "listen." I walk up to the So, what do you guys think? Was that a lady trying to communicate from beyond the grave, trying to get my attention by saying, "Hey, you"? Or do you think it was just my imagination? I could feel the chills down my spine. But it wasn't a bad feeling. It was just a feeling you get in the pit of your stomach and on the back of your neck when your hair raises. That you know that something is there. That you don't know what it is, or you can't explain it. But it is there. And that is what I was feeling. But I just kept recording. And I kept walking the campus. And I kept thinking of all the things and the stories that these buildings must hold. I really wish I could have went inside, but the security there won't let you. I did find this door open, and I put my camera up to it to have a look inside at the stairs. And I panned all the way up, and then you can see down, and my mind was wondering, what's down there? I wanted to go in there really bad. When we started to walk up the steps, I got an idea. I thought that I would put the camera up to the windows and see if it could see in. And then after watching back, you can see in. This is as close as I could get to going inside. But it was better than nothing. Just kind of looking into a whole different world. I looked as long as I could. And then I was on my way. I was really impressed of how gargantuan the building was. It really was a sight to see. I was very impressed. It was like a wonderland for people who love the supernatural. I found another window and I looked in. This time I saw hundreds of bicycles from many different decades. And these bicycles, I thought, must have belonged to the patients who once housed and lived in this asylum. And they probably had many tales to tell themselves. In fact, one of the most notorious tales is the one of Margaret Schilling, who wanted to play a harmless game of hide and seek. The legend goes, the staff was busy because they were overpopulated, and she went to go hide, and they didn't look for her. 2 days later, they could not find her. Over a month later, in a part of the campus that they did not use anymore, they found her nude, lifeless body laying on the ground. And until this day, there is a stain where her corpse lay, and they've tried to remove it many times, but it just keeps coming back. Over the years, psychiatrists and doctors there used many new and unorthodox procedures that had never been done before. The lobotomy became famous at the asylum, where they would cut and put ice picks through eye sockets to the frontal lobe of the brain and separate parts of the frontal lobe of the brain. Also, there was electric shock treatment, where patients were electrocuted with high voltage and wattage of electricity as it went throughout their body. Also, they gave them experimental drugs, psychotic drugs, and many of them became very sick from it. A lot of the staff was not trained in this field, and even though they tried, it became neglect. Also, the place became notorious for people dropping off their unwanted relatives and rebellious teenagers here. It created a chaotic mixture of people, to say the least. After I got done visiting the asylum, I walked across the street to the cemetery. The cemetery, the State Psychiatric Hospital Cemetery. There are over 1,900 souls buried in 3 separate cemeteries here. They all started out with just numbers and no names. In fact, the first 60 or so still are only numbers, and they don't know exactly where their bodies are buried either. They have no paperwork on them, and there is a memorial for them, but their identities and their genders are unknown. From the asylum, this grave of unknown was born. How could this be? How could something like that happen? Were they buried just like animals? It kind of makes you wonder. As I started walking down the hill, because they made it into a nature walk to see this piece of history, the cemetery is not owned by the university, so it is still pretty much like it always has been. As soon as you walk in, you can see the headstones all grouped together just in a bunch there. And those mostly represent the ones right there. Those represent the unknown. Look at them. Each one a soul. Once a living, human, breathing being, and now they're just a number on a rock, on a headstone. No name, no date of birth, no date of death, just fading away rocks. And there is a plaque in honor of them to let us know that they once existed. But that is all that's left of these patients. It is really unsettling if you think about it. And then I kept walking around the cemetery, and here is a view of those unknown markers from afar. And then as I walked around, I saw that a lot of them still were just numbers. It said in 1940s that they started trying to put the identities to the headstones and the graves. And as you can see, they have started doing that with a lot of them. But a lot of them still have no markers. They are still just a number, but they do know the identities of these people. After 68, they know the identities of the people There was a popular time in the 1970s when there was no one taking care of the cemetery. And during this time is when teenagers would have parties here. It made the local papers that something needed to be done because people were vandalizing this cemetery. And even this day that I was there, you could see that some of the tombstones were damaged. The tops of them were missing. Some of them were turned over. See, number 237 laying flat on the ground. And then I began to look around to look for more, to see if there was any more that had been damaged or vandalized. And then in the back row, that's where it was the worst. I saw many tombstones and headstones uprooted. Somehow, it didn't look like any storm had done this. But why? Why would someone do this? Why would someone knock over a tombstone or pull it up from the ground? I don't understand. I myself respect the dead and remember them in honor. They were once alive, just like me. So it's hard to fathom, to really understand how people could do this. There is another marker laying on the ground. And these markers were big too. They were probably about 3 feet in the ground. So someone had to have pulled for them to have come up like that. And then as I keep walking, I just can't believe that there was this many people, who had died from the asylum. And then I kept one thing in mind. This wasn't all of them. These are just the ones that didn't have family. The ones that had family got shipped away and buried into their family cemetery. So the final toll count, I don't know if anyone really, truly knows. But death was no stranger to the asylum. It was all too common of a time of tuberculosis, a time of experimental psychotic drugs, a mixture of people that shouldn't have even been there, overpopulation, experimental procedures like the lobotomy and shock therapy, and medicine that needed to be tested on humans. And then staff that wasn't really properly trained in how to handle mentally ill people. It was a horrible combination. As I walked down on the path, I saw into the little area that had been made by the college. It looked kind of like a swamp now. Someone had made a cross out of 2 sticks, and I thought it was kind of neat. I also, in the back of my mind, if I hadn't read that this body of water wasn't made not too long ago, could there be people buried under there. My mind ran wild. Then I just kept looking at the cross. I guess I was kind of thinking, I hope the souls get some rest and peace, because even in death, when the graveyard's been vandalized, they were still not able to rest as they should. But I thought the cross was a symbol of hope. A hope for the people who once lived in the asylum. I saw the rest of the nature hike through those woods, and I heard a sound of trees creaking. Luckily, I captured it on video.
Look how tall it is. It has to be about 150 feet. Nah, maybe about 100, a little over 100. Let's listen to when the wind blows. See if we can hear a creak. There's never any wind when you want it. You can't just cue the wind. Hey, there's a prettier picture of it, guys. Now let's just hope some wind comes through and I'll be quiet. Come on, wind. You guys hear that?
Once you come from the back way, after seeing the second graveyard back there, you can come up the hill on the other side, and you'll see that there's a few graves over there. And you can see they've started putting markers of people's actual names. They started burying them over there, over when they started making a third graveyard, or a third part of the graveyard. I wasn't able to read this big marker here. Maybe you guys can. I really couldn't make it out. And then I saw this really neat piece of tree that people had carved. I saw that there was a walkway that led back to the first cemetery that we had came from the entrance. It was almost time for us to go. I didn't want to, because I had enjoyed this tour, this time just to get away and to learn about history, a piece of history that may not be there very much longer because of all the renovation and all the changes. It's changing from the lunatic asylum to the ridges. It's becoming part of the college. I decided to walk up the stairs. I had to be careful because one step was out. And I walked back to the graveyard because I knew it was time to go. And that was my experience for the day.